Hello everyone, my name is Chelsea Utek, expat and speculative fiction writer, and it is the final day of PrepTober. So happy Halloween, I guess. Maybe you've been prepping all month, or maybe you are here in a last-ditch effort on this final day to plan something out and be a planner and not a pantser. But either way, we're going to hop straight in to the heart of your story, your plot. If you have time for one more video, I'm going to recommend my video on your opposing force, and so you can click on that up above to check out your conflict a little bit more deeply. But like I said, we've only got one day, so let's get to it. My favorite plot structure is a blend of the hero's journey and story beats, but like I said, one day, so we're just going to take the simpler version of hero's journey. In my opinion, this is going to be the most bang for your buck if you're trying to quickly plot. We can worry about diving more deeply into some of the plot points as you go, or even as you're editing in December. I love talking about plot structure, so if you want to dive more deeply into this, or you want to hear about the blend of these plot structures that I use, let me know. But I really want to get right into it, get your novel planned today with this simpler version of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's monomyth has 17 points, but I'm going to have 13 in the one that we will use today. So you start with a circle. I outlined this a minute ago using a bowl because if the circle was wonky, it would be far too distracting for me. Let's start. And then of course I freehand this bit and I mess it up. Let it go, Chelsea. Let it go. Okay, so we're gonna start by cutting this in half. About so, and then cutting it in half one more time. The upper half will represent the ordinary world, where the lower half will represent the new world, or the special world. And then in the upper half, we have the beginning and the end, and we will go in a clockwise fashion. So we're going to mark out 12 sections the same as a clock. So okay, so we have the status quo, the call to adventure, aid, crossing the first threshold, trials, approach, crisis, reward, result, return, new life, and resolution. We have the status quo, call to adventure, aid, crossing the first threshold. We'll just call it crossing the threshold, my bad, for the simplified version. Trials, approach, crisis, reward, result, return, new life, and resolution. So I said 13, and we're not actually counting status quo twice. There is an additional one that I'm going to put right here, and it's going to be our refusal. All right, let's go over these one by one. We'll start with status quo. In this section, you get the chance to write your exposition. I don't know about you, but I love me some exposition. I love showing off the setting I've created and getting to know my characters better. I do like outlining because it is a great reminder to not linger here too long. In this part, you should focus on the important aspects of your world building and setting up your character's normal life before it is turned upside down. We then have call to adventure. This is where their normal life changes. This is not when they go on their adventure just yet, but when they are called to do so. Sometimes that makes the adventure possible or even unavoidable. This is the equivalent to the inciting incident. A lot of the simplified versions skip refusal. I don't think any story is really complete without a refusal. The wording is not perfect because it's not always them refusing to go on this adventure, but we're not going to be able to make it short and snappy if we worry about fitting every story. So think of this as the character refusing or being incapable of going on the adventure. I personally love the refusal part. The character is saying, no, this is above my pay grade, or I don't think so, that sounds super dangerous. I love this second guessing. But it doesn't have to be just that. It's not strictly only a refusal. It can also be not having the strength, ability, knowledge, or resources to be able to go on the adventure. And that is also a great way to do this. A story just falls flat for me when there is no debate about the adventure. The refusal also sets up the next stage, being aid. The adventure still has to happen, otherwise it's going to be a very, very boring book or movie or what have you. So the aid is going to be what lets that still happen. So how are we going to get from a refusal to an action? There needs to be some sort of aid or help or assistance. This can be a sudden change or a well in inner courage, a necessary item, a mentor is very common, or any number of things. This stage will bridge the gap between the refusal and the story actually beginning at the crossing the threshold. Crossing the threshold, I never changed this wording from the original monomyth. That's because I like to imagine it as a literal threshold, and so often it is. Your character gets on a ship, or walks through a door, or enters the rabbit hole, or runs headfirst into platform 9 3/4. They now have to leave their ordinary life for some special or extraordinary world in this section. Trials will encompass the more minor trials of the story, but not the final hardship. In a video game, this is the early levels with minor bosses. In a romance novel, this would be like, I don't know, first dates and misunderstandings, and I don't know why I started this metaphor. I don't really know romance very well, but it's going to be not the darkest moment and not the biggest obstacle, but everything that kind of leads up to it to get ready. Approach is the suspenseful moment when they are approaching their opposing force. We are gearing up for a fight or confrontation or something that the character is preparing for here. In crisis, everything goes wrong for our character. Will the character fail? Will they give up? Die even? How will they possibly overcome what just happened? This is where the story goes very, very wrong for your character. However, because of that difficulty, the character gains something, some new resilience or understanding or knowledge, or maybe something physical, a new weapon or a power. Basically, we can think of the crisis as another instance of inability, like in the refusal stage. And the reward is going to be bridging the gap once more. Aid and reward are very similar in that way, so therefore refusal and crisis are very similar as well. Because of this reward, what changes, what happens, usually that means our character is now able to be successful in the final obstacle that they have, but not always. What is the result of the reward they just got? Remember, this is the big climax, not the crisis. Then that's going to bring us back towards the ordinary world once more. The adventure is wrapping up. In return, the character is now going to leave the special world in favor of returning to their normal world once more. However, something needs to be different. There really has to be something different, otherwise what was all of this novel for? What will this new life look like, and what has changed? We then move to resolution. What has the character learned, and how will we end things? And this brings us back to our status quo. But of course now something is different, right? This is the new status quo. It shouldn't be exactly the same as it was in the beginning of the novel. Alright, if that feels like a lot of information, don't fret. It's not as challenging as it looks. If you don't know right away what you want your plot points to be, looking at these 13 points, or 14 if you count having to come to the status quo twice, don't worry. Like I was saying, a lot of these can be thought of as bridges. So bridges going from one plot point to the next. So we want these sort of foundational pieces to be in place, and then we can consider how are we getting from one point to another. Of course, as we put the bridges in, we might find that the foundation needs to be modified a little bit. Have I killed this metaphor yet? But at least it gives us a point to start at. It can be kind of hard looking at a whole plot structure laid out in front of you and not really knowing what to do. So let's talk about those foundational pieces that you'll plan first, and then those other parts will be easier to plan. If you watched my other videos for PrepTober, then you know how focused on world building I was and how important I find world building. Well, I think it's most important to start with your exposition. Start with your status quo. It lets you get to know your character a little bit better, get to know your setting a little bit better before you go and upheave your poor character's life. So you should start with your status quo. Establishing a really strong status quo is going to let us feel the difference once we get into the story. It's going to set up a juxtaposition that tells us why this story was worth it, or why it's different, or why it was life-changing in some way. It really is going to set the stage for once the adventure begins and your character's development. So speaking of the journey beginning, we're then going to jump to the call to adventure. What happens that changes this status quo? What are you going to do that calls this character on an adventure? Remember, like I said, don't go straight on the adventure. Something needs to happen where the character should debate, or if not debate, run into some sort of obstacle. When faced with a great challenge, of course, maybe we're excited to take on something, but it needs to feel like a challenge. If not, we really can't relate to that main character very well. So now we're going to skip around a bit. Of course, if suddenly you already know what your refusal is going to be, write that down. Ignore this. This is really just to help you push yourself to figure out these stages. If something's already coming to you, ignore my advice. Follow your gut, write it down. But if you're not knowing what to do for all of these stages, then let's jump to crossing the first threshold, or crossing the threshold. Now the character has gotten from the call to adventure, and we're just going to believe that they're going on in this adventure. If they don't, your book will be very, very boring and very, very short. What is this adventure that they are going to be going on? From there, I recommend skipping the trials. You can get really bogged down. By you, I mean me, so probably other people. It's easy to get bogged down by the trials and to get very focused on those. Let's put those aside for now and really think about what is the main goal of the story. What is the main obstacle that your character has to overcome? So for that, I don't want to jump all the way to the result. Instead, I want to jump to the crisis. Your character is trying to reach that main obstacle and something needs to go horribly wrong for them. So jump down to that 6 o'clock spot and imagine that your character believes they're about to accomplish something great, finish something, move towards whatever their ultimate goal is, and there needs to be some sort of major setback here. Once you have that, we're going to need to eventually bridge the gap to, more likely than not, them being successful. I'm not telling you how to write your story. They can be unsuccessful if you want. I love a good failure every now and again in a book because we don't see them coming. But jump over to results. Eventually, we need to figure out whether or not they are successful, and either way, how does that happen? So right now, you should have your status quo, your call to adventure, jumping over to your crossing the threshold, jumping again to your crisis, and now again to your results. Okay, this is the foundation on which the rest of your plot will be built. Everything else is just going to bridge the gap between here and there. It's going to give you a chance to explore your world more deeply. It's going to give you a chance to develop your character, but ultimately everything that happens between those points needs to move us forward. So if you have your call to adventure and you have them going on the adventure, you need to have them have some sort of internal debate or some sort of conflict or some sort of inability that's going to help us build up the character. Very few of us are just going to be like, fight a dragon? Sure, here I go right away. We might ponder a little bit. And then what is going to get them over that, because we do have to go on the adventure. So thinking now to build in those steps there. If you're still feeling stuck on that, not to plug more of my videos, but to plug more of my videos, think about the brainstorming activities that I recommended in the first week. That's not just applicable to brainstorming initial ideas, but how to get yourself unstuck here. So with your foundation now, go step by step. How are you going to get from one foundation piece to the next? What I would recommend, and every time I recommend something, it's also me recommending it to myself, is not to get too stuck up on or too caught up on the resolution and the new life, all right? I feel that whenever I do this, I just end up changing it anyway. I would write down a basic idea, and like I said, one of my very favorite books, or one of my favorite books of recent time, has a 2-page return, new life, resolution. It doesn't really touch on the status quo again. It lets us imagine the status quo. If you haven't read The Vanished Birds, just read The Vanished Birds. It's so good. Don't get hung up on the ending. If you're writing a full-length novel, your 50,000 words isn't going to get you there anyway. Leave it for later. Focus on the first quarter, that beginning, the status quo to the crossing the first threshold, and that bottom half, the special world. That's where your real work is going to take place. The only thing I would say to note in your resolution is if you already have ideas and themes and messages that you want to get across, take note of how you would like that part to be resolved. However, we only have so much control over that as writers. Keep in mind that your reader is going to take from it what they want. It is my opinion that author intention has very little to do with literary analysis. All right, that's it. Let's keep it short, let's keep it focused. So good luck on your plotting, and oh my goodness, happy NaNoWriMo.